Yo guys, VisionSGen here, bringing you more Marvel Rivals content. In today's episode, bringing you the full Cloak and Dagger guide following the latest Season 2.5 update, breaking down all of their abilities, including the team up and addressing both the strengths and weaknesses. This is episode 20 of my new Hero Series guides with all of the previous episodes on my channel and linked in the description below. So on that note, let's get right into it. So first things first, as a general overview of this character, Cloak and Dagger is a hybrid support in this game, a strategist with A-tier healing capabilities, vulnerability effects that are applied to enemies, making them weaker and easier to kill, and for the most part, misunderused and almost misunderstood in my own personal experience from other players on my team. But also, using the auto lock-on tracking ability with the primary attack on Cloak makes the hero very viable as acting both as a final hit specialist within the team when in that damaging form, i.e. the Cloak form, but also an effective counter dive hero as well, applying constant pressure to over-aggressive dive and frontline heroes, making this a really good hybrid and balanced character. Now, the character has a 250 base health, quite squishy, so is vulnerable in that aspect, and only a 6 meters per second movement speed, which although is generally the standard for all of the characters, does mean that unless you have abilities, this character can be isolated with ease. So unless they have the healing ability or the invisibility, which I'll go over obviously in this video, you are going to be able to be sort of dove on and countered quite easily if you don't manage your abilities and your cooldowns very effectively. Now, as you can notice already, and if you weren't already aware, this character has two forms. The female form of this character, known as Dagger, the healing and defensive side of this hero, and then Cloak, who is the male form of this character, the offensive aspect and support style abilities, aka the light and dark sides of this hero, which you'll hear the terms use Dark Dimension and Light Force, etc. when you're playing as Cloak and Dagger as the sound cues and so on, which collectively makes Cloak and Dagger, which is a very effective hybrid support in this game with great healing, but also a great pseudo counter dive hero when played right, who a lot of people don't sort of take into consideration when you're playing as this character. Now, as Dagger, you will have various abilities. You have the primary attack, of course, which is the Light Force Dagger, where you unleash a bouncing Light Force Dagger to damage enemies and also heal your allies. Now, the projectile of this attack essentially uses a feature where pulling the closest target to the crosshair and then creates a spell field upon impact, and this spell field then provides healing effects to your teammates, dealing also 18 damage per round and healing for 16 per hit on your teammates, with an 8 meter radius and a fire rate of 2.27 hits per second with a 12 ammo count. But again, is a really good healer for the most part in this game, and this general primary attack isn't exactly the greatest, but for the most part, considering you have a 12 ammo count and it is really easy to use as it can bounce off walls and you can use it around corners and all sorts, it makes it really versatile for the fact that you can heal aerial allies, deep range sort of diving teammates that will go beyond your enemies, and then you can sort of reach those heals back line, and then also of course deal good healing to close range enemies where you're more beneficial and better suited for grouped up situations. Now, as well as this, you have the L1 ability known as the Veil of Light Force, where you deploy a Veil of Light Force to heal allies upon touch and then grants them with a healing boost. It provides an initial 45 healing amount, a 50% healing boost which lasts for 4 seconds, and has a 6 meter width and a 4.5 meter height with a maximum range of 25 meters, and again a 12-second cooldown. The cooldowns, which I'll go over at the end, is very important for this character as you have two different forms but not that many abilities between each form, so you have to bear that in mind with kit management and resource management to be really effective at this character. Now, the L2 ability, known as the Dagger Storm, where you launch a volley of daggers, creating a healing over time field upon impact, which provides a 55 healing over time per second for a 6-second duration in a 5 meter radius with a 12-second cooldown. This in itself is a great counter dive ability. I myself am a Vanguard main and have played a lot of reps as Venom, and this ability pretty much stops me from being able to damage Cloak and Dagger, especially when I'm on my own and I have no teammates supporting me. I physically cannot do enough damage to actually affect the likes of Dagger when she's in this form and puts down this healing bubble. It is a really effective ability for the most part, and it's difficult for high burst DPS heroes to remove players, especially when they're in this bubble. And that's pretty much it for the healing aspect of this hero. I'll go through more in a summary at the end of the video in terms of how you want to manage your abilities and so on. But as for the R1 ability, known as Shadow's Embrace, this ability is used to switch between the two heroes or forms, and mastering this does actually take some skill, and being good at kit and resource management is vital for Cloak and Dagger to be effective and efficient with not having to reload and waiting for your cooldowns. But in fact, you are far more effective when you are using your abilities as they pop and then switching between the two forms to make sure you're not waiting for cooldowns or you're trying to manage them effectively, because you're trying to juggle healing allies but also dealing damage as well, which is really important. So when you're switching to that Cloak form, you can use the primary attack known as the Dark Force Cloak, where attacks will basically target the nearest enemy to the crosshair, dealing damage, a lock-on ability which is really good for being a counter dive hero, a pseudo counter dive hero in fact, which deals 80 damage per second, which is actually kind of insane when you think about it, and has a 20 meter range and an infinite ammo, which is the key part. Now, this is a really effective ability, as I said, to act as a counter dive hero, because you can lock onto those pesty heroes that are basically really evasive, and you can basically track them and just trace them and just follow their footsteps and not let them get away, as long as you stay within that 20 meters, and be really effective at making sure players who get over aggressive can be punished. And then using the L1 ability known as the Terror Cape, where you deploy a veil of dark force to damage enemies upon touch, applying a blind to narrow their sight and vulnerability and amplify damage received to the enemy. This ability is an effective and key ability, being able to effectively damage buff your teammates in essence, whilst also then blinding that enemy because you're making them vulnerable and more susceptible to damage, which deals 55 initial damage and then blinds them for 1.5 seconds, where visibility is basically obstructed beyond 10 meters, making them so that they cannot see any incoming pressure or incoming damage. And then when the blind is effective, it has a 6-meter width and a 4.5-meter height, so that it travels up to 25 meters in distance and has a 12-second cooldown. So as you can see, it's really effective. And again, leading back to that point of managing these abilities can be crucial at staying alive for your survivability, as you are quite a squishy character, but also making enemies vulnerable and marking them for easy kills and so on is really effective as well. And then as for the L2 ability, known as the Dark Teleportation, where effectively Cloak enshrouds himself and nearby allies in the Dark Force dimension, plunging them up into the air into a phased state, making them untargetable, basically invisible to enemies, and then granting them with a movement speed boost. The special effect of this ability is effectively any allies in the area gain invisibility and a movement speed boost, which lasts for 2 seconds, and the ability has a 10-meter radius and a 12-second cooldown again, which is what pretty much all of these abilities have, is a 12-second cooldown. But it's effectively a camouflage, a really cool ability to save in your back pocket for when you either get dove on, or if you're trying to move your teammates really quickly at the start of the game, just for that brief sort of time, but can allow you to enter into sort of team fights a lot quicker and be effectively used when needed to escape from situations as well. And then as for the ultimate ability, of course, this is the main ability that pretty much most people want to use this character for, the Eternal Bond, where you perform 4 rapid dashes, healing allies and also dealing damage to enemies along your path, dealing 30 damage per second and healing for 250 health per second, which is obviously crazy, which is in effect for 13 seconds in duration and has a spell field of 4 meters in radius with a 15-meter length, and then costs 4,000 energy, which is relatively quick to earn for the most part, especially as a support, for considering the likes of Luna is like 5,000 energy, to give you guys an understanding of that. And then as for the team ability, the form of shadow to light, which basically Cloak and Dagger then injects light and dark energy into Moon Knight and creates a light and dark realm where Moon Knight can basically become invisible, allowing Moon Knight to basically use this bubble for 4 seconds and provides him with a healing boost of 15%, allowing him to slightly heal, but also uses this to be basically a sneaky assassin, has a 4-second invisibility where he can try and deal a crazy amount of burst DPS and then be a bit more effective. So the two of them work really well together. But in summary, Cloak and Dagger is a really good and effective hybrid support, being effective at healing in group situations due to the range of heals and versatility for the primary heal as well, but also the healing bubble itself, which acts as a counter dive immunity for this character and your teammates, but also being a sneaky counter dive hero, which again, not many people actually understand or sort of appreciate that factor, with the lock on in Cloak form, having decent evasive abilities, using the camo and the blind, which of course marks enemies with vulnerability, effectively acting as a damage buff for your teammates. So as you can see, there are various aspects of the role and strengths, of course, that come along with it, as well as that great defensive ultimate, which is only really vulnerable to the likes of Magneto's ultimate to counter you, but due to the low HP, managing the abilities and cooldowns can be a real skill to counter and master this character. But for someone who can manage these abilities really well, can be a really effective Cloak and Dagger main in this game, and also a meta hero for the most part, who is really effective. Anyways, guys, there you have it. That's the full guide for Cloak and Dagger. If you've enjoyed the video, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below if you have any suggestions on how best to use Cloak and Dagger or any tips and tricks that you've learned along the way. I'm VisionSGen. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.